This is Tyler Bowyer. And so there is something going on here with an alleged cover-up of an SA related to TPUSA. And so this guy, Brian Ferentz, this guy is a MAGA dude that is up on Charlie Kirk's jock. And this is the Tyler. This is the original article about allegations of SA. So it looks like the guy who wrote that long tweet is saying that Bowyer here, this guy, covered up an SA by a Turning Point employee. And so it looks like this guy has received a threatening letter from Turning Point Action's lawyer, Frank Carney, that says, as you know, you made no attempt to reach out to Turning Point Action for comment to verify claims against our organization. So they're threatening him after he wrote about a pattern of corruption by Tyler Bowyer and TPUSA, including that history of sexual assault allegations. This is a written statement, and there was a police report. Holy shit. Dude, I didn't even realize this. While in Arizona, I was introduced to and partially trained by Matthew Martinez. This is a female victim that was SA'd by Matthew Martinez. I was introduced to, partially trained by Matthew Martinez. 2 months later, leading up to him coming out to lead our first training, I helped him on several work-related projects. First day of training, Matthew had asked me if I might show him around a little bit. I was tired and busy, so I declined. The next day, Matthew asked me if I would drive him to a meeting. He didn't have a car, so I thought I was being helpful. He told me to expense my mileage because it was for work and that Tyler had approved it. Later during the work week, I offered to take him to see a basilica he had previously expressed interest in, as I have a strong love for that church. I love building friendships that are founded on a mutual faith in God. Okay, I offered to drive because that was what he had previously asked me to do, considering he had no car. We attended Mass, but then he mentioned he had an interview he had to do and would need to step away soon for that. There was a terrible cell service, so I drove us to a coffee shop down the road. He did the interview and afterwards expressed interest in seeing more of the area. We were about 5 minutes from a restaurant, which I knew very well because I had worked there for 2 years and was friends with all the staff, so it was someplace I felt comfortable and safe going to. At this point, I should mention that I do not drink. This was something I mentioned in front of the entire TPA staff during training a few days prior, and also mentioned to him in a conversation during lunch on that Monday. He was very aware that I do not drink. Matthew ordered an old-fashioned and kept badgering me to order an alcoholic beverage as well. I repeatedly refused, just ordered a water. After he received his drink, he further urged me to drink some. He would not let up to the point where I had to lift the drink to my lips and pretend to drink a sip so that he would leave me alone. Dude, yeah, this is like gnarly. Dude, that's like Jesus. At this point, our conversation got a little more personal. He asked me to tell me something about myself that nobody knew and made comments about the fact that I hadn't had a boyfriend in 4 years, as well as complimenting my eyes. He also mentioned that he loved smoking cigars and cigarettes. I said that I loved the smell, but I didn't smoke myself because it wasn't good for your health. He began pressing me again, saying we should stop at a gas station and pick up a carton of cigarettes. Dude, yeah, this guy is like, hey, man, let's go and do everything that you don't do. Let me break down all your barriers. Like, dude, this shit is like sort of like grooming 101 kind of deal, right? To get people to do some shit that they're then ashamed of and feel bad about and get them in that loop of like being stuck. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's really a very methodical sort of manipulative way of like taking power over someone through badgering and getting them to do little things that they then regret. So they're in like a shame spiral, right? That you then can manipulate and convince them to do even worse things down the road. It's like a super common tactic. He ordered a second drink. He also began to talk about how he was more rebellious than he pretends to be. His tone shifted a bit here, and he talked about how he's something of a rebel. He also mentioned he's afraid of flying and needs to drink alcohol before he gets on planes, something he asked me not to mention to his bosses. I was starting to understand that perhaps he and I were different people and maybe our interests didn't align in the way that I had thought. Although I'd considered having dinner, I changed my mind and began insisting that I needed to get home. I told him that I had to see my grandma that evening, so I needed to get back, despite the fact that his demeanor had changed a bit. I didn't want to leave him 20 minutes away from his hotel without a car to get back, so I told him I would drive him back to his hotel. After all, he had more tenure at TPA, and so I didn't want to make him angry with me for leaving him in a rural area where it is also notoriously hard to get a car service. Once we got in the car, the oldies station I left on was playing the Beatles song, I Want to Hold Your Hand. As I began to drive him back to his hotel, he mentioned the song, then took my hand in his. At this point, his entire presence changed. I realized that his intentions with me were physical, something that had perhaps naively never crossed my mind before. He asked me to pull the car over to the side of the road so that we could allegedly get out and dance together. At this, I started to panic. Again, we were in a very rural area, and if I pulled the car, there was a very good chance that no one would drive by us for quite some time. I'm also very physically small and not strong, and all of his talk about masculinity suddenly came across as much more of a threat than a brag. I tried to laugh off the suggestion, but my heart was now in my throat. Dude, it's so scary, man. You know what I mean? To be in like these kinds of situations, like, dude, like people shouldn't have to live in fear of being SA'd, you know? He again started mentioning that he wanted to get cigarettes, but I told him I needed to get home. He told me that I should lie to my grandma and my parents. Instead, he suggested I spend more time with him. He said he would take me to dinner somewhere. I declined. When we approached a red light as we came closer to his hotel in a more populated area, he leaned across the seat and kissed me. He grabbed my thigh. I was wearing a dress, and this made me panic. Slowly, he crept his hand further and further up and into my thigh until he was touching my underwear. By now, I was so afraid of him I could hardly speak or think. I was paralyzed with fear. Jesus. Then he said he would go with me back to the office and told me that I should lie to my parents and say we were doing work, insinuating something much more nefarious. Shaking, I declined. Finally, he suggested that we just go back to his hotel room. Then I said I didn't think that would be a good idea. My voice breaking as I tried not to start crying. He told me to think about it, but then quickly followed that up by stating I shouldn't mention any of this at our next training on Monday. Instead, he requested that I not mention anything and go back to being his admin. As I pulled into the parking lot of his hotel, he asked me a final time if I would come up to the room with him. I stopped the car in front of the doors to the hotel, and noticing people around, I told him to get the fuck out of my car in as menacing a tone as I could muster. He leapt out and ran inside the hotel, at which point I started on my way home. Immediately afterwards, he called me twice. I answered neither. Dude, he called her. My first reaction was to call my mother. In tears, I told her about what had happened. She kindly advised me to let TPA Enterprise Director 𝗏𝗏𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗏 know what happened. Once I returned back home, I sent him a message letting him know about the incident. Brett called me within a few minutes, asking if I was okay and safe, as well as apologizing for being out of town at present and therefore unable to help prevent the situation from occurring. Brett told me he would have to let Tyler Bowyer know about the incident as well, and asked if I was okay with Brett informing Tyler. I said that I was absolutely all right. A couple hours later, Tyler called me and asked me to briefly recap what had happened for him. I told him about what happened with Matthew. Tyler and I were the only two people on the phone call. During this time, he told me that he would be sending Matthew back to... So this is crazy. So she filed a police report. Isn't that crazy? That's fucking wild, dude. Good for her, man. The below excerpts from the police report detail some items of the alleged SA. In typical abuser fashion, the alleged abuser blames the victim, despite many other details confirming the victim's version of events. One key point is that both interviews involved the victim saying to the alleged assaulter to get the fuck out of my car. Does that make sense if the victim was to blame? Matthew also claims he could not answer certain questions about what happened and tried to remove a lot of that day from my mind. Dude, good for her, man. This is crazy. I mean, a lot of times women don't file police reports. This is the guy, right? This is the Martinez guy. But like, so there's an obvious like frat boy fucking culture, okay, that exists in TPUSA. Obviously, they're aiming their whole like red pilling conversion is aimed at the frat culture and young white men, young fraternity men where they can sell that misogyny, that racism, that homophobia packaged in you get all the power, get to do whatever you want. We're offering you the power, right? And it's very delectable to these young white sort of power hungry frat guys. That's who they like went after. And that's their chief sort of advertising unit. Now, this is pretty gnarly. It's exactly the Taint brothers. And it's pretty gnarly, though, that this guy is like, the thing that I don't like about this is just this guy is like that pressure campaign, right? The girl doesn't drink, but he's like badgering her until she takes a sip. Then he's getting drunk and encouraging her, you know, they're going to mass and she's talking about, you know, like living life in Christ. And he's like, lie to your parents and let's go back to the office and fuck around. And he's like feeling her up in the car and shit when like she's not showing any like, you know, signs of wanting to hook up. He's basically getting drunk, right? And, you know, moving on her like a bitch, as Donald Trump would say, you know? And what's crazy about this, though, guys, is when you have a young girl, okay, say this young girl is like good Christian girl. She dreams of like working with TPUSA and taking Christianity to young people. She doesn't realize it's this frat boy culture. Now she's worried if she goes out there and this guy touches her and she says something, no more TPUSA, no more like Donald Trump. Now the whole MAGA movement is against her, which everybody knows when the MAGA movement's against you, you're like fucked. It's like bomb threat fucked. You're like cut out of the whole movement, right? No one's going to believe her, but also they're going to prevent her from moving up in that whole like conservative Christian political world. They have the power. These guys, these TPUSA guys that are a step below Charlie Kirk, they have the power to decide which women and men advance inside this Christian political movement and which ones don't. That's a lot of power. And that power leads people to not saying no when they really want to be saying no because they don't want to ruin their whole fucking career. This is the same shit that like Pete Hegseth pulled, you know, when he fucking a married woman at a Republican conference. All she did was she was a chaperone helping the drunk Pete Hegseth get back to his room. And then the Christian coalition, the GOP that ran that event, they put her under an NDA to protect Pete. Probably ruined her fucking marriage, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, dude, what the fuck, bro? This shit is so dirty. So then there's a police report. And then according to the victim, corroborated by additional evidence and interviews, Tyler Bowyer inappropriately took over the interview from the HR department. Okay. So then what ended up happening is when they investigated this internally, that Tyler Bowyer guy was like, I'm going to investigate this. It looks like he took it over. Bowyer has a history of being dismissive of women and has had allegations of sexual assault made against himself. That Bowyer instructed the victim to show Matthew around and said of this alleged SA case toward the victim, it wasn't that bad and she should just forget it. That Bowyer scheduled Matthew and the victim to be alone in the office after the assault. If Matthew's account was correct and the victim was to blame, why would Bowyer do that when an investigation of SA had been opened? Dude, this shit is crazy. So anyway, dude, this looks pretty deep. I'm going to have to do some research on this. I can't unearth this all now. But holy shnikes. I think this story should be like followed up on. It really should. Because like this type of stuff, these types of things that can sort of break apart TPUSA, and these types of grifting things, like we gotta crack this shit open. You know what I mean? We do. We gotta crack this shit open. And I'm curious though if I can find more sources. Obviously, like I have to find more sources than just this one guy. But again, I have been hearing online. I have been hearing from a number of different elements of the MAGA like world. I have been hearing a lot of like sexual impropriety going on in the TPUSA youth movement, you know, which is not surprising because if we look at the Republican MAGA movement, I mean, dude, Trump is a sexual assaulter. They're all, right? These guys are all like SA and fucking, you know, they're all fucking degenerates. What is up, guys? Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, you want to support independent resistance media, you know what to do. Drop that sub, hit the like button, and please share it. And we do love our members, so if you want to become a member, it's another really great way to support. Thanks again for everything, guys. I'll see you next time. Let's go.